Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. If you like all things true crime, if you like it delivered in a peaceful, tranquil manner, if you like it clear and concise without drama, then I highly recommend you subscribe. And if you like what you hear, please smash the like button. It's a free way you can help. And now, without further ado, let's dig in. He was a 16-year veteran with the Boston Police Department, with 2 kids to raise, his 14-year-old niece and his 11-year-old nephew, whom he'd adopted when their parents, his sister, and her husband, tragically both died within months of each other in 2013. Sometimes life is just so cruel. Of Irish ancestry, with a twinkle in his blue eyes, he was a looker. She was a well-educated woman, a one-time professor, in fact, with big brown eyes and shiny brown hair. They'd first met in 2004 when they dated briefly. Then, in March of 2020, during the COVID pandemic, they'd reconnected and had been dating ever since, right up until this night, in late January of 2022. He was 46-year-old John O'Keefe, who'd moved to Canton, Massachusetts, into his sister's home after she died from cancer. Later, John moved with the kids to a new house in Canton at 1 Meadows Avenue. There they would all make a fresh start. She was 42-year-old Karen Reed, and she was John O'Keefe's girlfriend. Now, Karen was still in what I call the traveling girlfriend stage. By that I mean she still had her own house, but she'd often grab some stuff and spend the night at John's house. She also helped him with his niece and nephew. In fact, she was known to spoil the kids, which was something that John sort of frowned upon. They looked like the perfect couple, but as we know, looks can be deceiving. John and Karen had some issues. They were one of those couples that we all know, the one that can be kissing passionately one minute and then lobbing F-bombs at each other the next. Everybody knows a couple like this. One of the major issues was Karen's constant suspicion that John was seeing other women. She'd get incredibly jealous if she saw him talking to another female, even if it was a relative or a family friend. To me, this sounds like it stemmed from insecurity, but it could also stem from John perhaps being flirty with other women. I don't know that. I'm just speculating. Sometimes people become insecure when their partner has a roving eye. By January of 2022, John and Karen's relationship was faltering. On a recent vacation to Aruba that they'd taken with other couples, Karen spent 15 minutes one day screaming at John in front of the kids inside a hotel room. She'd seen John talking to another woman, but it was a friend, it wasn't some random chick. So that's the backdrop on which this bed crime story takes place. And now things are gonna get really cray-cray. On one very snowy night in January of 2022, Friday, January 28th to be exact, Karen and John's lives would take a dramatic turn. Understatement of the year. You see, by dawn the next morning, John would be dead. Ice cold dead. And his cop colleagues would be looking at Karen as the perpetrator. Now, on this particular evening, John had just learned that his niece had been accepted into a private school called Bishop Feehan High School in Attleboro. John was like ecstatic about this news. His friends, Carrie and Kurt Roberts, had also just learned that their daughter, who was good friends with John's niece, had also been accepted into this school. So John and Kurt decided to head to a local Canton bar called C.F. McCarthy's, good Irish name, on Washington Street to celebrate with a few Bud Lights. Now, Washington Street is a main drag in Canton, and there are multiple bars and restaurants on it. It's sort of where everything is happening. John and Kurt arrived at C.F. McCarthy's sometime between 7:30 and 8 p.m. John's niece had stayed home with a friend of hers, and John's young nephew was sleeping over at a friend's house. So the kids were taken care of, and John could let loose a little. Now, Karen also went to C.F. McCarthy's in her black Lexus SUV, but she didn't arrive there until 9 p.m. When she showed up, John was really happy to see her. They hugged and they kissed. At some point, Kurt decided to head home, and that's when John O'Keefe received a phone call from his buddy, Chris Albert, who was across the street at the Waterfall Bar and Grill with his wife Julie, his brother, Boston police officer Brian Albert Sr., Brian's wife Nicole, and their daughter Caitlin. Two other couples were also there, Matthew and Jennifer McCabe, whom John O'Keefe was good friends with, and Karina and Nicholas Kolokaithis. Finally, there was another guy named Brian Higgins. Chris invites John and Karen to join the group at the waterfall. So at 11 p.m., Karen and John just walk across the street to the waterfall where a live band was playing. So basically, we've got some fellow Boston police officers out on a Friday night with friends. A lot of alcohol is being consumed. It sounds like all of these people are well known in Canton, and that Canton has a sort of small town feel to it where everyone knows everyone else. In fact, Chris Albert owns a pizzeria just down the street from the Waterfall Bar. And often this same group will head over to the pizzeria after the bars close to make pizzas. How fun is that? A friend who has their own pizza shop. As I said earlier, John was tossing back Bud Lights. Karen was sipping on vodka and tonic through a straw. Now, round about midnight, it began to snow, and this was not a surprise. The weather forecasters had said that a huge snowstorm would be moving in starting around midnight on Friday, and this storm, or rather blizzard, was history-making. It would continue snowing from midnight into Saturday morning and throughout the entire day. In fact, when all was said and done, 21 inches of snow had blanketed Boston, and the temperatures had plummeted into the teens. Strong winds were stirring it all up, and Boston and its suburbs were looking like a giant snow globe. Beautiful, but treacherous. As closing time approached at the waterfall, the other police officer, Brian Albert Sr., and his wife Nicole, issued an open invitation to continue the party at their house, which was at 34 Fairview Road in Canton. Look at this house. Isn't it quaint? Just what you'd picture in Massachusetts. Karen and John had never been there before, so they needed directions. Part of the reason the Alberts issued the open invitation was that their son, Brian Albert Jr., was at home celebrating his birthday a day early with friends and some cousins. Jennifer and Matthew McCabe accepted the invitation, as did Brian Higgins and Karen and John. The latter left the waterfall and walked to Karen's Lexus, John still with a cocktail in hand. Karen got behind the wheel and drove them to the Alberts' house. Now, because everyone traveled there in separate cars, there were a ton of vehicles parked in the Alberts' driveway and in the yard, and the guests were arriving at slightly different times. The McCabes turned up around 12:20 a.m. At the same time, some of Brian Jr.'s friends were starting to leave, perhaps because of the weather. By now, the snow was coming down in pretty big flakes, and the wind was gaining speed. What happened next is up for debate. There are two versions of events. It is a she said and they said kind of story. Bottom line, John O'Keefe ended up dead, and 3 days later, Karen Reed was charged with manslaughter. That charge was later changed to second-degree murder. Karen insists she's innocent and that she dropped John off at the Alberts house and then drove home alone because she was having stomach issues. Not sure how John was supposed to get home. Anyway, this is why Karen Reed is currently at trial in Massachusetts. Note that she's out on bond, so she's not spending her nights sleeping in a cold jail cell. And by the way, she has some groupies who are very vocal about their support of her. Now, there's the prosecution side of this story, and then there's the she side of the story, which is Karen's defense team's story. Only a few things are the same in both stories. All of them agree that 1, there was indeed a blizzard that night and into Saturday. 2, people were drinking booze that night, including John O'Keefe and Karen Reed. And 3, that John O'Keefe was discovered in the Alberts' front yard the next morning under 6 inches of snow. Prosecutors say that Karen either accidentally or intentionally backed up into John as he stood in the Alberts' yard after getting out of her SUV. If she did hit him, it had to have been a very hard collision, because an autopsy later found several abrasions on John's right forearm, 2 swollen black eyes, a cut to his nose, a 2-inch laceration to the back of his head, and multiple skull fractures. Hypothermia is believed to have been a contributing factor to his death as well. The collision also allegedly left a large dent in the hatch door of Karen's SUV and shattered her rear right taillight, allegedly. Karen, of course, is claiming that these injuries to her Lexus happened earlier and that John O'Keefe had to have been injured after she dropped him off at the Alberts house. The prosecution further believes that Karen and John were arguing in the SUV on the drive over to the Alberts, and that Karen pretty much became irate. Remember, this is the couple that bickers all the time. They also contend that Karen, after hitting John with her SUV, left him injured in the snow and then quickly headed home so as not to be seen at the Alberts residence. We know that she didn't dial 911 to get help. She didn't run up to the Alberts front door to ask for help. Per the prosecution, she didn't go inside with John to enjoy the party. She simply left him face down on the cold ground on the left side of the yard near a flagpole. And as the blizzard grew in strength and fury, it slowly but surely covered John with those 6 inches of snow. This is likely why no one at the party, either inside or leaving allegedly, noticed that a grown man was lying injured on the front lawn. One witness would later say at trial that she saw a black blob in the snow, but did not take the time to investigate it. John O'Keefe would lay there on the lawn under the snow until 6 a.m. the next morning. That means that he was outside in that blizzard for at least 5.5 hours, if we go with the prosecution's story. The prosecutors base their theory on 1, the serious injuries that John sustained, the fact that some people saw Karen's Lexus parked outside the Alberts house that night, the dent in the back hatch door of her SUV, broken shards of her taillight in the snow around John's body, as well as John's fallen cocktail glass. Per the prosecution, Karen then drove to John's house alone and perhaps went to sleep. Now, the prosecutors also have several witnesses who say that they heard Karen make damning statements about what happened to John. And there is also a voicemail that she left on John's phone at 1 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, January 29th, which would have been right after she drove home from the Alberts. The voicemail said, quote, "You are an effing loser. F yourself. And John, I effing hate you." End quote. Not a smart move on Karen's part if she really hit John. You don't want to incriminate yourself with a nasty voicemail, but maybe she was so intoxicated that she didn't realize how hard she hit John. Maybe she didn't even notice that he'd fallen to the ground and hit his head before she drove off. Maybe Karen's telling the truth and she's not the person who caused John to lose his life. This voicemail could either help incriminate Karen or it could make it seem like she really did not hit John. Again, why leave such a voicemail if you know you've just seriously injured your boyfriend and left him on the ground during a blizzard? You have to have known that if he dies, law enforcement's going to access his voicemails and see what's there. Of course, we can't forget that Karen had been drinking, so perhaps her ability to think rationally was compromised. Maybe she was blackout drunk where you really don't remember what you did. Now, according to the prosecutors, at around 4:23 a.m., so 4 hours after Karen drove away from the Alberts house, John O'Keefe's niece called Jennifer McCabe. Remember, Jennifer was at the Waterfall Bar with her husband, Matthew. She was also at the Alberts after party with her husband. And by the way, she's also the sister-in-law of Brian Albert Sr. So Jennifer was good friends with both the Alberts and with John O'Keefe. Jennifer and Matthew had actually been neighbors of John's for a long time, and their daughter and John's niece were good friends. And I got the feeling that Jennifer was almost like a surrogate mother at times to the niece and the nephew. But let's get back to the niece's call to Jennifer. So the niece tells Jennifer that Karen is distraught because John isn't home yet and he's not answering his cell phone. And Jennifer McCabe testified at trial that she heard Karen Reed in the background of that call screaming, and she was screaming, "John didn't come home. We had a fight." Jennifer also testified that Karen allegedly told her after John's body was found that she did not see John after everyone left the Waterfall Bar. But Jennifer knew this was not true because she is one of the people who say that they saw Karen's SUV outside the Alberts house that night. This makes it seem like Karen was maybe trying to come up with an alibi early on. She was clearly trying to say that she never even drove to the Alberts house that night, so she couldn't possibly be the person who hurt John. So Karen Reed was frantic that Saturday morning, and by 5:07 a.m., she was captured on John's security camera backing out of his driveway in her Lexus SUV. The camera shows that she came dangerously close to his SUV as she drove out. Is it possible that she was still intoxicated? Could she have made contact with his SUV? And is that how she dented the back door of her car and broke the taillight? I'm assuming the camera can probably tell one way or another. I'm thinking that if she really did hit John and run over him, she might have been having flashbacks in those moments Saturday morning in her head, and maybe she was panicking, thinking, oh my God, this might not be a nightmare. This might be real. Like, what if she went home so drunk, fell asleep for a few hours, and then awoke around 4 a.m. and noticed that John wasn't in bed? Could her mind have been reeling in that moment, seeing like flashbacks or slides of hitting him and then driving away. This is just me speculating, by the way, because of course Karen Reed denies hitting John. After backing out of John's driveway, Karen drives through the blizzard to Jennifer McCabe's house. When she arrives, she's screaming out Jennifer's name. They make it sound like she was screaming Jennifer's name from outside the house, as in, Jen! Jen! Jennifer's husband, Matthew, tells his wife to get Karen to shut the heck up. For Jennifer, Karen was hysterical, and she showed her a cracked taillight on her SUV. Karen was also telling Jennifer that John's not home, and she's worried about him. So Jennifer gets in her car with Karen. Karen is in the rear passenger seat. She's too distraught to drive. And another friend that Karen also called, Carrie Roberts, also joins the women. She follows them in her vehicle. Now, all this time, it's still dark out. The snowstorm is still raging. According to Jennifer, as she's driving, Karen asks her if she thinks John could be with another woman, someone he previously dated. Jennifer described Karen at this point as, quote, spiraling. At some point, as the women are in the vehicle, Karen allegedly says, quote, what if he's dead? What if a plow hit him? I don't remember anything from last night. We drank so much. I don't remember anything. End quote. So Karen, Jennifer, and Carrie eventually arrive at the Alberts' house. Now, Jennifer has testified in court that when they arrived there, Karen started screaming, there he is! And she bolted out of the car toward the flagpole area of the yard. Note that neither Jennifer nor Carrie noticed anything in the yard when Karen said this and when she got out. Again, John was under 6 inches of snow. So this is why prosecutors also believe Karen knew what she'd done to John on Friday night, because she knew exactly where to dig for him in the snow. According to Jennifer, Karen, once she dug down to John, who was completely unresponsive, she straddled him and she lifted up his shirt, and then she lifted up her shirt and she went to lay on him to try to warm him up. Jennifer said that Karen was screaming, is he dead? As they attempted CPR. Jennifer later testified that when first responders arrived on scene around 6 a.m., Karen very clearly repeated, quote, I hit him. I hit him, I hit him, end quote. Now, as the first responders tended to John, Jennifer and Karen prayed together. Jennifer said Karen then asked her to do an internet search. According to Jennifer, Karen grabbed her hands and said, Google hypothermia. Google how long it takes to die in the snow, end quote. Jennifer then called her husband Matt, told him that they'd found John in the yard in the snow. Matt quickly got dressed and he headed over to the Alberts' house. He testified at Karen's trial that this was all very chaotic. He also said that he recalls seeing an SUV that looked like Karen's Lexus outside the Alberts' house on the night of Friday, January 28th. So again, both Jennifer and Matthew say that they saw Karen's SUV at the crime scene. So it's 6 a.m., everyone's at the Alberts' house, emergency vehicles are showing up. Several firefighters see that John's right arm is injured, his eyes are swollen, his body is very red from the cold. Eventually, an ambulance takes John to the nearby Good Samaritan Hospital, and they give him a warming treatment. When they checked his body temperature, it was 8 degrees. The heating treatment, tragically, did not revive John O'Keefe, and at 7:51 a.m., he was officially pronounced dead. Karen was at the hospital when this happened. 3 days later, she would be arrested and charged with manslaughter, and later that charge was upgraded to second-degree murder. Next time on Bed Crime Stories, I will tell you the defense team's side of the story. They, of course, claim Karen Reed is innocent because one or more people inside the Alberts home, according to them, beat up John O'Keefe, dragged him outside to the yard, and left him to die in the snowstorm. And some of their evidence is compelling, so don't automatically assume that Karen Read is guilty. Until the next time on Bed Crime Stories. Now do me a favor, on your way out, smash that like button.